Welcome to the Entrepreneur Masters series. I'm glad you're joining me today. I am the real Jason Duncan. You can call me JD. We've got a fantastic episode planned for you today. We're going to be talking about listening and what the cost of not listening to your customers is. And it's more than you think. And there's certainly a lot of ways that we need to investigate this. And that's why we're doing this. So let me tell you a little bit about the EMS. Thank you. If this is your first time joining us on one of these live webinars, I want you to know that this is a bi-weekly series of webinars that I do live here on all the platforms. So we do it on Zoom. It's live on LinkedIn. It's live on YouTube. It's live on Facebook. And it's live on Twitter. So we go live on all those locations, all those platforms. And I do this and I curate this content, invite guests in like we've got Oscar Trimboli on today. We invite these guests in who are experts in particular fields that are of interest to us as entrepreneurs, as business leaders. What can we learn from these men and women that we bring on the show that will make us more money, that make us have the ability to have more impact in our communities, and ultimately give us the life and the lifestyle that we want to live? So what I do is I bring in these guys, these ladies that talk about entrepreneurship, leadership, sales, financial literacy, anything related specifically to growing and building entrepreneurial companies. And each episode has the opportunity for you to get yourself involved by asking questions. So here's what you're going to do. So if you're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or LinkedIn, there's a chat function inside those platforms, and you can just chat right there in the live. So right below the video, you can chat and ask a question. Our producer is Garen with Desk Rig. He's on the back end making all this stuff look pretty. And if you do any kind of shows like this, go check out deskrig.com. They do a great job. But Garen in the background is watching all this stuff, and he's going to try to pick up the questions and drop them in. Now, if you're on Zoom, if you're watching this on Zoom, thank you for doing that. You can go to the Q&A bubble at the bottom of your screen, hit the Q&A bubble, and ask any question that you might like to have us answer live. So Oscar and I both will be watching that. Garen's going to be giving us the stuff in the background so that we can see it. So we want to hear from you. This makes it much more interesting if you ask questions. So let's go ahead and talk about what today's show is going to be. Today's title of the show is The Cost of Not Listening to Your Customers. You don't really have an idea. I don't think any of us have an idea how much not listening to your customer is costing you. I've been in sales since, I guess I started selling at age 16. So I've sold millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of stuff. And I can tell you that the cost of not listening to my customers has probably cost me a few $1,000,000 in income over those years. But rather than beating the competition to an ideal customer, trying to maneuver that other person trying to do what you're doing, what if you just listened better? What if you were able to get to the bottom of the matter more quickly just because you listened better? And what happens if you get the wrong customer because you weren't listening? You ever had a bad customer? You ever had a customer that wasted money? You ever had a customer that wasted time? You ever had a customer at the end of the day, you made money on it. You're like, I wish I hadn't made that money because this guy's a pain in the keister. I'm not interested in dealing with this person. Probably can be traced back to the fact that you didn't listen. You were saying one thing, he was saying another. You heard something that he didn't say. So today, this is a masterclass with one of the world's leading experts in deep listening. We've got Oscar Trimboli, who is our guest today, and Oscar is he's on a quest to create 100 million deep listeners. He's an author. He's the host of the Apple award-winning podcast Deep Listening, which you can listen to on any podcast player, plus the Apple iTunes and the podcasts. A sought-after keynote speaker hailing from Sydney, Australia. He's passionate about using the gift of listening to bring positive change, not only in businesses, but also in homes and in cultures worldwide. He's interviewed over 100 of the most diverse workplace listeners, including air traffic controllers, deaf and foreign interpreters, hostage negotiators, and spies as part of researching world-class listeners. And if you've ever flown an airplane, you want to make sure that the air traffic controller knows how to listen. You want to make sure they're listening to the right instructions. A go and a no sound a lot alike. So you may want to, when he's saying don't take off, or go, please take off, you need to make sure he's listening. Over 14,000 people have contributed to his research of what gets in their way when it comes to listening. And Oscar's a marketing and technology industry veteran working for Microsoft, PeopleSoft, Polycom, and Vodafone. He consults with companies like American Express, AstraZeneca, Google, HSBC, Montblanc, PwC, Salesforce, Centify, and Siemens. So this guy knows what he's listening about. See what I did there? He knows what he's talking about too. But Oscar loves his afternoon walks with his wife Jenny, their dog Kilimanjaro, and he will be playing Lego with one of his four grandchildren every weekend. So please help me welcome to the show Oscar Trimboli.
Thanks, JD. Looking forward to listening to everybody's questions today.
Yeah, this is going to be really good. And if I could be completely honest, I'm a little bit nervous. And I don't get nervous when I have guests on the show, because you know why I'm nervous? Because I know you're listening to every single thing I say, where some people just don't listen, and I might say something dumb and they don't care, but you're going to be hearing everything I say. And so I've got to, I got to get over myself, but nevertheless, I joke a little bit, but I'm really glad you're here. So tell me a little bit about how you got into the listening game. We're going to start there, and we're going to work into some very tactical information on today's show.
Yeah, sure will. And for your nervous condition, please be aware, a good host will listen to the active speaker, but a great host will listen to the audience. So today, our focus is on you. Everyone who's logged in, everyone who's listening, everyone who's watching. And I would encourage you to ask any question at all. JD, you can't ask me a poor question. You can ask me any question you like. That will be fine. Please don't feel nervous. I'm not a perfect listener. The reason I'm training myself in how to listen is because I'm trying to get better in every conversation. Most of us don't want to seek perfection. We just want to make progress in every conversation. To understand me, you need to go back to a boardroom, April 2008. It was a budget setting meeting. It was a budget setting meeting between Seattle, Singapore, and Sydney. There were 18 people on this video conference, well before COVID. And these meetings are renowned for going over schedule. The meeting was scheduled for 90 minutes. And everybody's arm wrestling. The corporate office is trying to get the most growth. The local office is trying to get the most realistic growth, because if you miss your number, staff lose their jobs. And sometimes corporate budgets are set by numbers in spreadsheets. When you're facing an employee face to face, you know they might lose their job if they don't get their target. Now, JD, at the 20-minute mark of this meeting, my vice president in the room said to me, "Oscar, I need to see you immediately after this meeting." Now, I completely stopped listening from that point, and all I did was try and figure out how many weeks of salary I've got left in the bank account, JD, because I think it was 8 weeks. Now, miraculously, the meeting finished early. It finished at the 70-minute mark, and as everybody walked out, I tried to do the same thing. And Tracy said, "Please close the door, Oscar, and come back." And as I walked back, she said, "You have no idea what you did at the 20-minute mark." And I thought, I'm getting fired and I don't know why. And I sat down, I looked her in the eye, and she said, "If you could code how you listen, you could change the world." And although this was really profound, a moment of really deep listening on Tracy's part, JD, the only thing going through my head was, woohoo, I haven't been fired. And I honestly didn't pay attention to anything she said from that point on. But the difference between hearing and listening is action. And I've been trying to code how to listen since 2008.
So 2008, big time. So 2008 was a big time in our world. We were going through the Great Recession, lots of stuff going on. But you were able to, in the midst of that, figure out the next step, because it would assume that at that moment, you're like, this listening thing that she just complimented me on and told me about, this is going to be a big thing. Maybe you weren't totally of how it might turn out, but your life changed in 2008, just like a lot of other people's did. So what'd you do next? How long did you stay working in the corporate world before you kind of decided to turn your listening superpowers into a business of its own?
I didn't. I in fact got a 32% uplift in my budget line in that meeting, whereas typically we're getting 15-16% budget uplifts. And because I wasn't listening and paying attention in that meeting, I walked out of that meeting with my tail between my legs. And you know what, Jace? I wasn't thinking anything about listening. to be deadly honest, until 2 weeks later, when the finance director said to me, his name's Brian, he said, "Oscar, can you come and audit my listening in the budget setting meeting for the States?" And I said, "Brian, I have not got time for this listening caper. You've been talking to Tracy. I got a 32% uplift in the budget line. I have no idea how to get there." And then he said, "Oscar, I can't change your top line revenue number. What I can change is the investments we make for growth. So if you come and audit my listening, we can have a conversation about where we invest for growth." What time's the meeting, Brian? Where is it? I'll be there. Because I was in sales. I needed to make sure that I was selling. So in that meeting, I noticed, oh, wow, Brian asked really long questions. Gee, there's 16 people in this meeting. Only 3 people are contributing. Gee, oh, wow, the kind of quality of conversation is pretty low. And I was writing all this down, JD. I realized in that moment, I was coding how to listen. And I realized that the way I listened in the world and the way others is a little bit different. Now, I wasn't saying I was a rock star when it came to listening. I trained with some of the world's best academics. I've trained myself through the original research we've done with nearly 24,000 workplace listeners right now. And as my wife, Jenny, would say, I'm completely obsessed about the commercial cost of not listening. And that journey has just progressed along here. So I left the corporate world in 2014. And 9 years later, I'm still coding how to listen, whether that's the listening quiz, the practice cards, 3 books on the topic, our jigsaw puzzle game, our award-winning podcast, all these ways a way to code how to listen. So I made lots of mistakes along the way too. Sometimes trying to be too perfect, sometimes thinking I know more than the people I serve. And as one of my leaders once said, the truth is always with the customer, Oscar. You are always wrong till you test what you think with a customer. And from that, whether it was the book or the playing cards, whether it was the quiz, they all came about from customer suggestions. I didn't have an original idea. Even the podcast, somebody said to me, "Hey, Oscar, why don't you stop your newsletter and do a podcast? Because if it's about listening, why wouldn't you make it a podcast?" And I thought, oh my God, I've been sending out newsletters for 1.5 years. That's so obvious, Oscar. Listen.
So how obvious is it to people that listening is a skill versus just something? Like listening, obviously, if you have the sense of hearing, you're able to listen audibly. Obviously, there's listening that can be also sensory, can be visually, etc. But if we're just talking about hearing, how obvious is it to people that in your experience that there's a skill to listening versus just hearing what people say?
I want to channel Luke, who did a review of our book, How to Listen, on Amazon. And he said, listening, like comedy and sex, we all think we're better at it than we actually are. And most of us have never been taught how to listen. Now, I'm not going to ask you to rate yourself on the other two, JD. Don't worry about that. But as you think about that statement, what's profound about what Luke said in the review is most people self-assess their listening. So you check in and you go, how do I think I'm listening? And like sex and like comedy, let's just pick comedy and keep it PG for the time being. The value of comedy is only when an audience is present. You can't have a joke with yourself. Well, you can, and it might feel good, but it's not the purpose of comedy. And it's a contact sport. Like listening, you need one other person or a group of people to do it. The difference between comedy and listening, though, is the role of comedy is to make people laugh and reflect on what they say. And the instant feedback on how good your comedy is the laugh. But you don't get that when it comes to listening. We don't get the quality of feedback that a comedian gets. Now, I'm not going to tell you what the benchmark is on the other topic. I'll leave that to everybody else to figure that out.
I think we should. Take a poll. We should take a poll.
So The first challenge with people thinking about listening as a skill is we've all been taught math, so we know divide, subtract, multiply, and addition, right? There's a very simple framework. It's universal. Doesn't matter what language you're in. There it is. When it comes to chemistry, there's a universal table of elements that's called the periodic table of elements, and it's identical no matter what language you speak. Every language has got nouns and verbs and adverbs and adjectives. There's a structure. Now, maybe it was different where you went to school, JD. In my school, I didn't have a listening class yet. That's pretty much all I was doing. When I went to college, I didn't have a listening class. In your neck of the woods, did you have listening subjects?
Never.
Were you taught listening?
No.
So for most of us who run our own business, we're spending well over 70% of our day in listening mode. And there's a good little thing for you to think about. If you're spending more of your day in talking mode than listening mode as a leader of a business, you've probably got the balance a little bit off. 50-50 is okay, but when you're talking more than you're listening, you're not hearing the truth from customers, and then you're not hearing the truth from employees, you're not hearing the truth from suppliers, you're not hearing the truth from your affiliate partners that you may be working with as well. So when it comes to listening, it's a skill, it's a strategy, and it's a practice. It's like going to the gym. You want to be doing some push-ups every day. And when it comes to listening, we just want to get that much better in the next conversation, JD. It's not about the Hail Mary pass. It's not about the magic win. It's just doing little things a little bit better in every conversation. What I'm fascinated, JD, right now, as you're listening to me, what's going through your head?
Okay, so not a rhetorical question. So that's the first thing I noticed. So it's not a rhetorical question. What's going through my head is, as the host of this show, I'm trying to think about what would people want to know about listening. I'm trying to analyze what you're saying as quickly as I can possibly analyze it through the filter of my own life's experience. And honestly, I'm debating whether or not to say my experience in listening versus what I think other people might be experiencing. So that's a very
Let's
deep
start with
answer.
yours. We'll start with yours. Just overlay, what are you thinking based on your own listening experience? What is what we've touched on already brought to life for you?
Well, so thank you for giving me permission to talk about myself. I think that over the last several years, I'd say probably 3 to 5 years, I have been told on multiple occasions by people that I respect that I am a very good listener. And that is not normal. That was not a normal comment that I would have heard 10 years ago for sure. So I wonder, like, what happened in my, like, when did that switch? Because I don't know that I made a concerted effort to become a good listener. I'll give you one example. There's a guy, and then those of you who are in Nashville, where I live, may know who I'm talking about. But there's a guy who owns a private club in Nashville. His name is Joshua Smith. He owns the Standard in Nashville. I'm a member there, and I go there frequently. And Josh is a very successful guy, and I'm involved in the leadership of the club on some different levels. But he has on multiple occasions said to me after we've spent an hour together talking about things, like he'll look at me deep in the eye and say, you're one of the best listeners I know. And then he'll also say that to other people. So that's one story. And I'm wondering, well, where did that come from? So that's my experience.
And I'd like you to stay there and just go back. You said it's 4 to 5 years, something has changed in the way you notice you're listening. Let's just explore it a little bit longer, because I think it'd be helpful for all of us listening to notice someone as successful as you. Where did that come about?
I think that I had a friend in high school, my best friend. His name was Mike DeGuire, and when we met in seventh grade. He moved to our city and became a student there, and we hated each other's guts at first year or so. We did not like each other at all. I wanted to fight him all the time, and vice versa. We never fought, by the way. But I remember one point we were friends, but this time, by the time this story happened, but I was the kind of guy, I was a budding ultra crepidarian. You ever heard that word? Happen to know what that word means? Most people don't. But an ultra crepidarian is someone who espouses opinion on things that are as fact, that upon which he or she has no basis of knowledge. So ultra crepidarians are the Cliff Clavins from Cheers who always say their opinion on things as fact. Well, I was a budding ultra crepidarian, and I remember sharing one of those stories one time in our group of friends. Just like somebody said something, and I had to give my 2 cents. And my friend Mike DeGuire turned to me and said, "Would you shut the hell up? Nobody needs to hear what you think every single time." And I had that moment of awareness. Now that didn't really change my experience, but I had that moment of awareness that stuck with me. And I think, to get back to your question, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've replayed that story in my mind now as a successful entrepreneur and a business owner and a leader, that I don't really need to give my opinion on everything. And so therefore I end up being silent most of the time and just listening through the conversations. And then when I say something, I hope that it's meaningful. So that may be the only conscious thought that I've had about all this.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think it changes the speaker's experience, JD, when you don't interrupt, when you don't jump in, when you don't offer an opinion, and you create enough space for them to fully explore not just what they say the first time, but what they think and what they mean? Because the way you've explained it, to be listened to, you need to feel like you've been seen, heard, and valued. And I think the insight for you is silent and listen share the identical letters. And this is one of the key ingredients that separates good listeners from great listeners. They're comfortable with silence. In the West, we talk about the pregnant pause, the awkward silence, the deafening silence. Yet in high context cultures, China, Japan, Korea, the Polynesian cultures, the Inuit of North America, the Amazonian tribes, the Maori of New Zealand, the Aboriginal cultures of Australia, silence is a sign of wisdom, respect, and authority. And it creates a space not just for an individual, yet for a group. And my speculation is, for the most successful professional relationships you enjoy, and whether in a personal sense, but also in a commercial sense, you probably use silence much more and quieten down your own mind and allow them to say not just what they think, but what they mean in a conversation. Shortly, I'm going to share with you some of the practical neuroscience and the maths of listening, because listening is an art and a science. I'm going to talk about the science and why silence is like a magnet to draw out of the person. Not what they say the first time, but what they truly, really mean. And when you listen to customers this way, yes, you'll win. And that will be wonderful. But more importantly, you'll be different and they'll refer you. There'll be moments where you are not present in any conversation and your customer will be selling you on your behalf, saying, wow, look, JD's organization has probably got the solution for you. But what sets JD apart is when I speak, he actually listens. And you can move your customers from a transaction to a way to go to market that is completely unstoppable and differentiated because they're selling on your behalf. And the cost of not listening is the opposite. When you don't listen, they will tell the next prospect, don't work with JD. He might have the solution, but he doesn't listen. Which one do you want? Do you want the first client? Do you want the second client? Most of us want the first one. Yet we've got to show up with our devices down, our attention out, and our presence signaled by our silence to be available to the other person. Now, I can see, JD, you are processing like a machine right now. The cogs are going on in your head. What's going on now?
So I recently read over the last couple of years, I think the number is 54, the 54 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Are you familiar with that book? Ever heard of it? No, not okay. So
I'll trust you.
I think it's the 54 laws of power. The listeners, this will be a test for our chat. So if you know what the number is, I think it's 54. I can't remember if it's 50, 52, or 54, but drop it in the chat if you know who it is. But Robert Greene wrote this called, I'll just assume it's the 54 laws of power. And it's a historical review of all of the ways the most powerful people in the world, all the way back to ancient times, used power to accomplish their means. Now, some of those use power in negative ways that I'm not interested in as a follower of Jesus. Those are things that I'm not interested in. However, that being said, there are principles of power that he reveals. And one of them, I don't remember how he worded it, but was about not revealing, about how silence is power and not revealing your position until required to do so. And so I remember reading that over the last couple of years. And as I read that, I thought, I wonder how this plays out. And so I began to practice what that meant to not reveal, to practice the power of silence. And then another book called the Charisma Myth by Olivia Fox Cabane. I don't know if it's something you're familiar with, but she talks about power, presence, and warmth being the definition of charisma. And then when she talks about presence, she's talking very much about what you're talking about, Oscar, about being present in the moment and simply seeking to understand rather than to be understood. And so all of those, you're asking me what's going on in my brain. I'm trying to synthesize all of these things I've about over the last several years and try to make sense of how I've become what I think is a much better listener. I don't know. My wife may have a different opinion, but I think better than I used to be.
Yeah. And for those of you listening, the same thing's going on for you right now. You're processing what I say and Jason's response, and you're overlaying that over your life experience, your education, your family situation, the culture you're part of, the organization you're trying to grow. All of these things are filtering how we listen. So I just want to check in, Jason. Is now a good time to see if people have kind of got any questions that they want to ask about in the chat? Is Garen curating stuff?
Yeah, so, let's do that. So if you're watching live on any of the platforms or you're in Zoom, go to the chat, in Zoom, go to the Q&A bubble, but everywhere else, just go to the chat. If you got any questions about listening, if you're looking for the skills, if you're looking for any tactics or tips, we've got people viewing. Garen says we don't have any questions that have yet come in. So we're going to keep talking, but if anybody's got a question, make sure you drop it. Garen will pick it up and throw it in here. I do have a question. If we get down to specific skills around listening, besides the theories that you and I've been chatting about cultures thinking that silence has power and that listening is really good, but what skills can you teach us that will help us become better listeners?
There's 3 specific skills that are very simple to say and difficult to practice. We've been tracking 1,410 people with these 3 very simple things over the last 5 years. These people who apply these 3 skills consistently say their meetings are shorter as a result, and the meetings they have bigger impact. A reminder, these skills are easy to say, they're difficult to practice. Yet when you do practice, it's like the difference between eating healthy and eating what you feel like. There's a discipline, there's a self-respect, there's a respect for the people you're talking to if you practice these 3 skills. I'll also give you a bonus, which is easy, fun, and light as well. To put these skills into context, let's just build the foundation of listening as numbers. And when you understand these numbers, you understand why these 3 skills matter. The numbers are 125, 400, 900. 125 words per minute, 400 words per minute, 900 words per minute. Let's deconstruct those numbers from the speaker's perspective first. 125 words per minute, their speaking speed. Yet their thinking speed is 900 words per minute. that means the first thing that the speaker says is 14% of what they're thinking. This is why silence is so powerful, because it allows them to reveal the next 125 and the next 125 and move from saying to thinking to meaning. When you hear what somebody means, not what they say, they feel heard, seen, and valued. The most difficult position in a conversation is actually the speakers. But as the listeners, we don't understand that. So let's pop over and look at the listener's experience. The listener's experience is this. The speaker is speaking at 125 words per minute, and Jason's already described this. Jason can listen at 400 words per minute. Now, we know we can listen to podcasts and YouTube videos at 2 times speed and have complete comprehension without any problem. The mind can process much more. Because you can listen 4 times faster than they can speak, your mind gets bored, gets distracted, it finds solutions, it creates objections, it argues with the other person about a different life experience, a different set of beliefs that you have, and that's all happening in your head while you're waiting for the very slow speaker to speak at 125 to 150 words per minute. So conversations are flawed if all you do is listen to the very first thing somebody says. The caveat is this advice is for people in working relationships. I'm not talking about life partners. I'm not talking about JD's wife. Please don't try any of this at home on your children or on your life partner either. So now with this massive differential between their thinking speed as a speaker and your listening speed, you can see is set up to fail. The conversation is on 2 different rail gauges. One is set up on the speaker's rail gauges, and the other one's set up on the listener's rail gauges. The only way to get those gauges lined up is to explore what they haven't said, get that extra 125 words out, which JD's talked about. Silence is one of the things to do there. Now, I'm going to come to the 3 tips, JD, but I'm curious, as you hear these numbers, what's going on for you?
So I am, I've got a degree, a master's degree in education, and I taught school for 4 years. And one of the things that we learned through the process of teaching, learning the craft of teaching, was the numbers that you gave about the speaking and the listening speed. Not the thinking speed was different. I know that's the first time I've heard that. So, but then we also had I forget now the number, but the speed of the note taking speed. How fast the teacher would speak versus the ability that I have to think and write that down. Listen and write that down really quickly. And there is a chasm between the two. So when you're speaking to teach, my opinion is that you must go much slower, because if someone is taking notes and trying to analyze that, physically, you need to kind of keep up with their pace. Because if you put it on 2 times speed, it's going to just make it that much more difficult. But my question is this: I know that those numbers, 25 words per minute, which is speaking speed, 400 is listening speed, and 900 is thinking speed, and that's average. But is there a way to test that and know what yours is?
Well, you can test your listening speed really simply by figuring out on your podcast player or your YouTube, at what speed do you lose comprehension? That's the quickest way to test your listening speed. Now, when you're testing it, test your comprehension with a speaker who's speaking in a language and a context you're familiar with. So if you're listening to a context about chemistry and you're not familiar with it, the cognitive load on you is going to be much higher. So just pick a topic you're familiar with and just keep moving the YouTube play speed or your podcast play speed as high as you can go. See at what point you just go, oh, I just can't process that. So that's the simple way to test the speed of your listening. The speed of your thinking is done with a MRI machine. So I don't think a lot of us have access to an MRI machine to test our thinking speed. The average is 900. The range is 600 to 1600, high-low, in those experiments that the scientists did about the thinking speed of people. So that's a quick way to test it. When it comes to our 3 tips, I'll give you the 3 tips and you pick where we're going to go from there, JD. Tip number 1, use the technology. Don't be a slave to technology. The biggest barrier to most people's listening is connected watches, cell phones, laptops, iPads, any kind of electronic device with a notification based on our research is the biggest thing that gets in the way of people's listening. Now, our context here is quite unusual. I don't think many people will have all these chats going on as an example. But when you're face-to-face with somebody in a one-on-one, one of the most important things you could do, particularly if you're visiting a prospect that you want to be a customer, simply do this. This conversation really matters to me, so just bear with me. I'm just going to switch off my cell phone. I'm going to put it over here. Now, JD, if I did that to you and I was calling on you for the very first time in a face-to-face conversation, what would you think about the level of attention I'm about to pay next? What are they anticipating?
That's a significant change and a pattern disruptor for most of us, isn't it? I mean, we expect people to not to be rude and check their phones, but it's not a surprise when they do. So for somebody to say that they're not going to, that's a pattern disruptor that, whoa, okay, this person's actually going to listen to me.
Our research from these 410 people that we're tracking say a third of the people they're speaking to in one-on-one conversations will mirror that behavior. Good listeners listen to what people say. Great listeners change the way the speaker communicates. And if you can get your prospects' attention in that conversation by you role modeling switching your device off, a third of them will do the same. How different will the quality of the conversation be if they're not anticipating something on a device? It will be a very different quality conversation. So although the theater of switching it off, and this is a ritual I do, is important, it's not for you. You're not doing it for you. Yes, you are, but not really. You're doing it to improve the quality of the conversation, and you're sending a signal to the other person. I value you, I value your time, and I value this conversation. And you want them to become present as well. The impact of your listening will be much higher if the speaker isn't distracted. So there's 2 really deliberate reasons we do that. If you're hosting a group meeting, you should do exactly the same. In 2010, Peter, visiting vice president, flew from Seattle to Sydney. Effectively a 24-hour flight for him. And I was hosting 20 CEO business owners of technology businesses. And Peter was there to update them on an important change we were about to make. It was in a boardroom, in a hotel, in Sydney, and I can remember it was pouring with rain outside, and I thought he'd be late from the airport, but he wasn't. He arrived on time. We made all the introductions, and I handed over to Peter for the update. And Peter stood up and he took his cell phone and he walked to the corner of the room where his bag was and he switched it off and he sat down again. He said, look, I've traveled all this way. The most important thing I can give you right now is my complete and undivided attention. And what struck me with Peter is of the 20 people around the table, 19 people switched off their phone. And the reason we know that is one person's phone rang during the conversation. They had to leave the room. What was interesting, though, that person never returned. And what we know is the people in the room who considered themselves competitors had a high-quality conversation, and partnerships emerged in that room based on what Peter was saying about the changes that were going to take place. Peter left the room, and I had half an hour more with the owners. And they all said one thing consistently. I asked them, what's the number one thing you're taking out of this conversation? It had nothing to do with the technology. It had nothing to do with the margin improvement we were providing to them. They all said, wow, how different was that conversation with all of our phones off? And it was a different quality conversation. To this day, I know half of those people still stay in touch and have either bought the other business or have created partnerships where they cross-refer business to each other. So tip number one, use the technology. Don't let the technology use you. Now, sometimes you're on call. Sometimes you might be on a manufacturing line that requires your attention. You might have a medical emergency that you need to deal with. You might have sick kids. Just signal that to a room in advance and just say, normally I'd switch my cell phone off right now. If you can just bear with me, I'm dealing with a situation with my father who's just had a stroke, and I need to keep my phone on. And that's a real situation I experienced 2 years ago with a client. And the client was very forgiving. The phone did not ring, but they realized if it did, that was the only reason why it was going to ring. So as important as it is, now remember the notifications that you get on your devices, JD, that was all built on the same psychological research that was used in the 1970s for the poker machine or the slot machine industry in Las Vegas to make sure people kept putting money in the slot machines. It's designed to put you in a haze. It's designed to get you unconsciously just following the next step. Use the technology. Don't be a slave to the technology. So tip number one.
Well, on that tip, Oscar, could I ask you the converse? Is there a way that we can positively use technology to give us better listening skills? Is there, because I agree with what you're saying 100%. I've been to lunches, I've been to meetings where we all take our phones and we put them in the center. And the one fun little game you can play is that you put them in the center and you turn them off or put them on silent. And if any phone rings, that person's got to buy lunch for everybody. Little
Love
game you
it.
can play. But is there a way to use technology to improve our listening?
Absolutely. The first thing I would say is in every operating system, Android, Apple, Windows, all those operating systems have a little switch in the settings that says, if I'm in a meeting, switch off my notification. So you don't even have to think about it. You just have to do it once. So if you've got a calendar blocking something out, you're not going to receive notifications. But the converse is true too. There is, I'm going to talk about Zoom. I'm going to talk about Google Meets. I'm going to talk about Microsoft Teams. I'm going to talk about any kind of video conferencing platform. There is software right now in Google Meets. It's really simple. It will tell you your speak to listen ratio. It will literally have a heads up display at the top of the meeting showing you the percentage of time you are speaking versus you are listening. Now, it's a little game I play with myself when I work with clients, and my goal is always to be 90% and higher, but that's a different story. My context is about listening. The good range is between 50 and 70%. There are plugins that work for Zoom that do this. There are plugins that work for Teams that do this, that help you in that moment to go, oh, what quick check. Now, there are paid versions of those bits of software that will tell you about, you can kind of define who the customer is in group meetings, and it gives you the customer speak to your organization listen ratio as well. So if you might have multiple people on the call, it's a bit difficult to keep a track of that. So the technology can do that. And then there's a technology that takes it to a different level. There are technologies like Cyrano. This technology measures based on the language that the prospect is using on the call, their commitment level throughout the call. Not their tone of voice. Are they positive? Are they neutral? Are they negative? Those heuristics are very simple. In fact, they're using language models that are the equivalent of teenage language. Cyrano takes it to another level. Cyrano works with a language model of somebody who's about 30 years old in the workplace, so they've got some level of experience. But based on the language people are using, it will tell you how committed they are to the idea, the concept that you're dialoguing through as well. It also gives you speak and listen ratio there as well. With Cyrano, it also tells you, does this person value relationships more than evidence in the way you ask questions, in the way you provide answers? So, Jason, there is a massive industry. If you use Salesforce, they have these tools embedded in their systems. If you use HubSpot, they're embedded in their systems as well. So when it comes to the technology, it's technology and not technology or. So let's make sure we're using the power of both together in an effective way rather than an unconscious loading money in the slot machine kind of response.
Yeah, I use an app in my Zoom meetings when I have a group coaching call, when I do coaching with my clients, or if I'm doing a mastermind call. There's an app called Blue Sky Timer, and it shows up in the meeting as an attendee. So it has its own square on the screen, just like you and I have squares right now on our screen. But you can make it show a clock, or you can set a timer, which is kind of neat because everybody can see the timer. But the coolest part of it is that not on screen where everybody can see it, but me as the host, I can be on the dashboard for the timer and see the pie chart. And the pie chart has everybody's speaking ratio, which I think is phenomenal. And the guys who talk a lot, their pie pieces are much bigger than everybody else's. So thank you for that tip.
How does that impact your listening behavior as you see that dynamic change, though, JD? Because it's one thing having the tech; it's another one understanding how do I adjust accordingly.
Well, as the facilitator of those calls, when it's more discussion based, I'm able to see, okay, Bob, for example, Bob's talking 3 times as much as everybody else in these meetings. Then I can tactfully, either if necessary, I can speak up directly, but most of the time I could just make a comment at the beginning. Hey guys, I'm kind of tracking how much time we all speak. So when you do your speaking, just kind of pay attention. You're not taking everything up. Like imagine a pie chart. You don't want to be the biggest piece of pie in this conversation. And sometimes that's all I have to say, and everybody becomes a little bit aware. Just like we all know, awareness is the key to recovery. So that's how I use it.
Have you ever wondered or experimented with sharing that with a group so they see it as well?
I have, and I've never done it. And the only excuse I have for not doing it is that every once in a while there's a glitch in Zoom that will show somebody in 2 pieces of pie with 2 different colors, and it's not accurate. So I think there's a kink in their technology armor and is not giving me 100% accurate data. So that's my only excuse there. That's a poor excuse, but that's the only reason I've never done it.
Yeah, when I share it, and I don't do it in the first set of meetings, I will comment in the second meeting, hey, just so you know, I've got a technology that's anonymously tracking my listening versus speaking ratio. If you'd like, I can turn that on for you. And half the people go, oh, wow, that sounds cool, and turn it on. And then the other half, you have a really extended conversation, and eventually they say, yeah, turn it on. Again, as you say, awareness is key. And a lot of us go, technology is our enemy in this case. This is a beautiful example of technology augmenting and creating metadata so that we have insights that we can't keep in our working memory real time. And as you said, all of a sudden you go, okay, I need to listen to a wider range of opinions because Bob's talking a lot. It's always Bob, isn't it? It's always a
Bob.
It's never a Barb. So that's good use of technology in that regard. If you're in group meetings, the other thing is always group meetings, and you can do this in the chat while you're listening right now. What's the one thing you really struggle with when it comes to your listening? Just pop that in the chat and you will see patterns emerge. So whatever the meeting context, you can always ask the team, hey, if it's on Zoom, what are you really struggling with on this project? What are you really struggling with on this product? What are you really struggling with this customer? And you can adjust the content accordingly. And this is a really skillful way to listen to a group really quickly as well. All right. I'm mindful we got to tip number one. So
yeah. So what's tip number two?
Again.
I'm interested. So I'm interested in tip number two. So we got the using technology, but don't be a slave to it. So what's tip number two on listening skills?
Tip number two is ask this question, ideally before the meeting, but most of you won't have this opportunity with customer conversations. So ask it when you arrive. The question is this, and this question is very precise. I'll give you two examples of it. And the first one is, if you use this question, it becomes a listening compass for the conversation. And when our deep listening ambassadors, those folks we're tracking, use this question, what they say to us is, meetings are shorter, and the meetings that they have that are shorter get to the real issue much faster. So imagine you've got a 1 hour meeting. I'm going to give you the question that's the listening compass. And we're going to check in every 15 minutes against this question. And what typically happens in a third of cases, by the first 15 minutes of a 1 hour meeting, the person you're talking to will go, I've got exactly what we need. Let's wrap it up. That's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing. And the reason is you're checking against this question all the way through. You check at the 30-minute mark and you check at the 45-minute mark, and you will get a really different outcome. And the question is this: what would make this a great conversation? Not what would make this a great conversation for you. Don't add for you on the end of it. The reason is this: the conversation is the intersection of the speaker and the listener. Conversation has its own direction. The conversation has its own purpose. And too many of us think that listening to the speaker is the best place to go. And the really important you ask this question before the conversation commences. It's not about the agenda. We're going to talk about stuff. What's your business problem? How can we solve it? Are we a good match? What's the commercial terms? Yeah, we'll get to all of that. I got a video from a graphic designer in Illinois about a month ago who used this question and was shocked. And they said, Oscar, I've never got the quality of response for a brief that I have here, and I've picked up so much more work than I ever would. I think it's a fluke. I'm going to try it again. I just think I got lucky. He tried it again with a completely different customer. Same thing. He picked up more work. The question is this: what would make this a great conversation? When they say what will make it a great conversation, you make sure you write that down. Because at the 15-minute mark, JD, you're going to say to me, Oscar, at the beginning of this conversation, you said X would make it a great conversation. How are we going? How are we tracking? And that will give the person who, a lot of people struggle with people who just talk a lot. They can't structure their ideas and, they're meandering all over the place. And you want to show respect to the prospect because maybe that's the first time they've said it. Using this question is a checkpoint. And they'll go, oh, yes, that's right. You know what I haven't told you so far, JD? Bingo. Now you're getting to what they haven't said. You're getting the extra 125 words out. In 28% of cases with the deep listening ambassadors, the meetings stop at the 15-minute mark. In the others, they basically say, we've covered off all I need, but now that I've discussed that, there's another thing that's really important that I haven't even mentioned. Could you help us out with that? Well, I don't know. Let's find out. This listening compass and this question is critical because it doesn't matter if you're talking to an employee, a supplier, if you're talking to your tax attorney, if you're talking to a prospect or a customer, if you're talking to the media even. This question becomes really powerful, and you checking in every 15 minutes showed that you were listening at the beginning of the conversation. And they will say things differently because they know you're really giving them attention right now. So tip number 2, ask the question, what will make this a great conversation?
How do you, is that question that you ask at the beginning of a corporate meeting, as well as just a couple of people sitting in a coffee shop having a specific conversation, not a collegial, friendly, just two friends hanging out, but if you're trying to get to something, do you ask that question in that session and also in a professional executive corporate meeting?
That question we've road tested in medical context, with general practitioners. We've done it with lawyers and accountants. We've done it with business owners. And that question, whether it's one-on-one or in group meetings, differentiates people. I was working with a recruitment firm in the United Kingdom, and they're very specialized in a particular area of medicine that they recruit for. They're very successful. They got offices in London, Europe, Boston, San Diego. And the owner of the business literally practiced that question. She did her version of it in a lovely British accent. You've got to think of her that way. So it wasn't precisely those words, but she used a variant which sounded like, I'm curious today what will make this a great conversation. So she just added a bit. The intention is identical. So it is not about the precise words. Try to keep it 8 words or less, because any questions with more than 8 words is bias. So the shorter the question, the more likely you are to get more from what they haven't said. Bias questions are not bad, by the way. If you need to make decisions, allocate resources, choose from alternatives, bias questions are really important. But for these kinds of questions where you want to open up at the beginning, these questions, 8 words or less, what will make this a great conversation, become really helpful. By the way, if you know the host and the group in the meeting and you're visiting in and you think it's going to be productive, don't just ask the host of the meeting that question. Just look around the room and go, I'm curious if anybody else would like to add to that. Because what happens in most cases, the host will hear something different from what they said. Remember, a listener will hear the active speaker. Great listener will hear everybody. And what will emerge is more trust and rapport really, really quickly. But it will only happen if you repeat that response between 10 to 15 minutes through a 1-hour meeting and 7 to 5 minutes in a half-hour meeting as well. So tip number 2.
Very good.
What will make this a great conversation? Now, Jason, do you remember what I asked you before we went live to air?
Yes, you asked me that question. You did. As soon as you said, ask this question, I knew where you were going. Like he asked me that question before we started today. So you did it.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, here before we get into tip number 3, I want to talk about our sponsor. So I'm going to take just a minute to do that. So give me just a second, Oscar. So I want to talk to all the listeners about Story. So Story is our primary sponsor of the Entrepreneur Master Series, and since we're talking about listening today, I want to kind of play into that. So you and I, as people who are doing business out in the world, we want people to listen to us. We want to get their attention. And one of the ways that we get their attention, hopefully so that they'll listen to us, is we do social media short form videos. And social media short form videos are the primary way that people are getting people to not only become aware that that person exists, maybe that you exist, but also aware of what you do and perhaps even give you money for your services. So if you think back 20 years ago, you needed an ad in the yellow pages, or maybe 30 years ago. Today, 10 years ago, you needed a website. Today, you need to be doing short form video content. But the problem with that is that you don't really know where to go to get it done. Some people are shy on camera. Some people don't know what to write. They certainly don't know how to edit it. And that's where Story comes in. Story is a unique company that takes all of that, all those things that will cause problems in you being able to do this short form video and do it for you. Now, of course, you got to get on camera. You've got to hit record, but they do it all. They give you the prompts. They tell you when to record. They write the captions for you. They do the hashtags, and they'll post it to your channels for you. If you want to try Story out, you can try them out for free. They'll edit one video for free, and they'll do a demo for you on their stuff and give you a discount if you decide to sign up. To get that, all you have to do is go to therealjasonduncan.com/story. That's STORYY. Why there are 2 Y's? Because don't forget, the story is about you. When you do these videos, you're going to see a bigger impact in your ability to get people to listen to you, to see you, and to hopefully buy from you. So go to therealjasonduncan.com/story and try that out today. And my big thanks out to Connor Snyder and Devin Gillen at Story for being the sponsor of this webinar series. So let's, Oscar, get back to the 3rd tip. So we've got tip number 1 is use technology, but don't be a slave. Tip number 2 is ask this question before every meeting: what would make this a great conversation? And so now here we are at our 3rd tip. What is the 3rd tip, Oscar?
Before we jump to the 3rd tip, just if you're looking to go ahead with Story, one of the things you want to do with your video, ask your tribe what are 3 things they're struggling with right now, and explain what you're struggling with too. So if you're struggling to figure out what content to create, a question will create more engagement with your audience than a story alone. I'm not saying stories don't matter. Stories and questions, the 1-2 punch. Connect with Story. They do an awesome job to get your message out into the world. Now, tip number 3, when it comes to listening, is this. You may have noticed I'm drinking a lot of water, Jason.
Gotta stay
In
hydrated.
fact, that's how much water I've been drinking for the time we've been together. Tip number 3, drink a glass of water before the conversation commences, and drink a glass of water for every half an hour you're in a conversation. Here's the science. Number 1, you're role modeling for everybody in the room, because when you take a glass of water, it's more than likely so will everybody else. The science is this part of your body here around your lungs and your heart is called the parasympathetic nervous system. This has got more nerve endings than your brain. Your gut feel sits in this part of your body. And when you drink water, it creates a calming effect. So you're available, you're less distracted, and you're more present. Very easy to do, very difficult to practice though. For most of us, we don't have water nearby. When I go into reception, when I'm going to visit for the first time or a regular client, I always, and receptionists know this with me by the 3rd meeting, I always request, if you don't mind, would I be able to bring a jug of water and some glasses in for everybody in the meeting? Now, in some cases, that's always present, but it's not true all the time. What the water does, Jason, is creates silence. It gives everybody a chance to just pause, to reflect on their thinking and go, hey, is what I said aligned with what will make this a great conversation? What will make this a great meeting? or not. If you get distracted while somebody's talking and it's a really long story and you can't connect with it, just pause, drink a glass of water. It will help you reset your listening compass to bring you back into the conversation. We know in most cases, if you pour that jug of water in a meeting room, everybody present will want to have a sip of water. It's a very social thing, by the way. Now, if you drink coffee, that doesn't count as water. Drink coffee, great, no problem, knock yourself out, and drink water. A hydrated brain is a listening brain. So here, this part of the body is 5% of body mass, your brain, yet it consumes 26% of blood sugars. And listening is a very difficult task in a group setting or when you're seeing a new prospect. A hydrated brain is a listening brain. So make sure you're drinking a glass of water before the meeting commences and every half an hour in the conversation. Now, as I've said, Jason, all of these are so easy to say, yet they're very difficult to practice. We suggest you practice them in that order. Master the distractions electronically first, and once you've mastered that, practice the question. Once you've mastered the question and the devices, move to the water. Those three things will completely change the way you listen. And more importantly, it will change the way the speaker communicates their idea. How will you go with tip number 1, Jason?
So interesting on the tip number 1, the technology thing is I've been using that feature that you spoke about, that the technology turns off all notifications, for so long. I don't even think about it anymore. That it just happens. Like my phone will not ring when I have a meeting scheduled on my calendar. It won't ding, it won't buzz, it won't do anything. The exception to that is that if my wife calls, because I've got it set up for her to call. So there are, and so in most cases, it's okay if she rings. But if there are sometimes I'm sitting in a big meeting where there's a lot going on, I'll turn the phone off because I don't even want that option of her interrupting the meeting, although it almost never happens. So I think that's a great tip. So the tip 2 about asking that question before the meeting, what's interesting that you mentioned that, because as a salesperson for so many years, and now as sales training is part of what I do as a business coach, is that I teach, and I do this in a sales situation, to ask a question very similar to at the very beginning. It's more geared towards, we're trying to get to a preferred outcome as a salesperson, but it's the same idea. But it always makes for a better conversation. And that question that I ask, and I teach other people to ask in a sales conversation, is something to the effect of this: I'm really glad that we're having this meeting today. So here's how this meeting is going to go. So I've got some questions that I need to ask you so that I can understand what you're dealing with. I know there's going to be questions that you're going to want to ask me, but when we get through all this, we get to the end, make sure that we together can decide what next steps there should be, if any. Does that sound fair to you? And so what that does is it sets the stage for they know I'm asking questions, and personally, now they know that I'm kind of in charge of what's going on. They have the opportunity to ask questions, and then I'm not going to force them into something they don't want to do, because at the end, we're going to decide together whether or not we need to move forward and decide the next steps. So I think that's interesting. The glass of water thing, never tried it. I'm going to have to give it a shot.
Okay, so just a little reflection on the process you set up. You giving them, is that okay with you? And you will hear what they say, but what it won't allow you to do is hear what they haven't said. So what will make this a great conversation for you gives them a way to check in all the way through the meeting. So you want to check in at the 15-minute mark and check if we want to continue, is what I'm saying to you, because they might figure out in 15 minutes that we're not a good match. And then you can refer, because the only thing worse than losing to the competition is winning a customer that you haven't heard effectively, and you've got a really unprofitable customer. And honestly, that doesn't matter for you. what matters is they're going to trash talk you in the market. They're not going to refer you well. They're not going to speak highly of you because everything's really difficult for you. So when it comes to our listening, bear in mind, if you don't hear what they don't say, which is 86% of the dialogue, if you don't ask these 3 questions during the dialogue. So these 3 questions will unlock that extra 125 words so you can hear not just what they've said, but what they think and what they mean, and they will feel heard, seen, and valued. These 3 questions are really simple. They are so short, you'll be shocked. Now, don't use them as abruptly as I do, just use a variation of this. The first one is, tell me more. Now, this on a listening compass is a north-south question designed to keep the dialogue going in the same direction because you think there is more that they haven't said. So the way I would say it is, JD, I'm fascinated. Say more. Same intent, less than 8 words, and JD will say more. In that case, we're listening for similarity. We're going in the same direction. Now, if you want to ask an east-west question, a question designed to elicit them to think differently and for you to listen differently, is you ask a version of this. And what else? This moves their speaking direction 180 degrees in a completely different direction. Most people don't realize they're asking questions that's taking a conversation in the same direction it's already going. And when you ask these questions, always ask, tell me more first, always ask, and what else second, so that you're getting both 360-degree views of that. And a version of and what else. If your accountant was here, what's the question he would have asked, she would have asked that we haven't asked? All of a sudden, they'll pause and go, oh yeah, I haven't told you about blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden you're listening differently and they're saying what they haven't said. The final one is the shortest one. We've already discussed this. It's the most potent, it's the most powerful, but it's also the most intimidating. It's this. Now, don't worry, no webcams are frozen in the making of this video. It's about, it's
So
about
the accountant
pausing.
question, well, the accountant question, I was writing that down. The accountant question is really interesting. I think that's, I've heard the first 2, but the third one's a really interesting one to me. How did you discover it, and what is the intent behind it?
Okay, so the accountant is a version of a question that gets them thinking 360 degrees. I'm going to give you a range of those, and then I'm going to deconstruct the intent of the question. I'm curious, if your competition was in the room right now, what would they laugh about that we haven't even discussed? If your most cynical employee was in the room right now, what's the question they would have asked that we haven't asked? If the media was in the room right now, what would have been the question a journalist would have asked that we haven't asked? If a regulator was in the room, what's the question they would have asked that we haven't asked? If your lawyer was in this room, if your other shareholder was in this room, if your life partner, if your children, if your grandchildren were in the room, what do you think they would have asked? Now, the intent of this question is very simple. Most people will dialogue from their perspective consistently. They will describe symptoms and not the system in which they operate. And when you listen holistically, 360 degrees all the way through your compass, you will get a series of perspectives that are very unique. Good sellers beat the competition. Great sellers help the customer explain the business case through 365 degrees. The reason I'm asking this question, Jason, is to uncover all the unspoken objections, that this person may encounter when they go back into their organization. And I want to bring those perspectives into the conversation in a very elegant and clean way. This is not a manipulation. I want them to cleanly explain who else they need to do this with. So the intent of this question is, if you have a sales pipeline that's really fat in the middle and not moving as fast as you like, you're not asking these question sets. You are getting blocked because you're talking to somebody who likes to talk to you instead of getting a full perspective about what's getting in the way of them navigating the business case through their organization. As I say that, Jason, I'm curious what's going on.
I love it. I love the idea of having 360 degrees of questions. And I think that there's a lot of application in a sales perspective, but I think obviously it's not just designed for this. You can get into a corporate meeting, and if you ask that question at the beginning, what would make this great conversation for you? And then you do your check-in at the 15 minutes, just like you said, you're drinking the water, phones are off, somebody says something, and you go, tell me more about that. And just that's it. Now you're going to another level. And then when they finish that, then you say, well, and what else? Like, that keeps them talking. I think I love the north, south, east, west idea. And then that final wrap up question for that particular subject is, if your accountant or if your competition or if your whatever was here, what question would they ask that we haven't talked about? What would they think? I think that's a phenomenal way to have a great conversation. And what's interesting about this is that everything we're talking about is about listening skills, but all of the tactics were about things that we say or do. Isn't that interesting? So listening is not just about what we are, being silent and not saying anything. It's about actively participating. One of the things that Olivia Fox-Cabane writes about in that book, The Charisma Myth, when she's talking about being present, and she says that if you ever feel yourself, not being present, like if you're aware of the fact that you're spaced out, talking or looking away, is like wiggle your toes and just focus on your toes for a second, or think about your breath, in and out, and it kind of centers you back into the conversation. So I think what's interesting about what you do and what she teaches and so many other people, it's that listening is physical. It's physical as much as anything else. It's getting involved, and I think that you would probably agree with that.
Yeah, look, in the book How to Listen, we talk about listening as a full body experience. That's why we interviewed blind people, we interviewed deaf people, we interviewed deaf interpreters, we interviewed foreign language interpreters. They all talked about using their eyes, their ears, and their body as an instrument to listen. It's important that you listen to your own body and notice the way you're breathing, as you mentioned from Olivia, but also notice the breathing of the speaker as well. When your face is not connected to a device and you can be present, a change in their breathing pattern is a signal to go and explore that a little more. A change in their vocal pattern when they maybe talk down from here versus talking more from here. These are coming from two different places. They are signals, but when you're not present, you can't get those signals. And you need your body tuned first before you can tune into their body. We talk about orchestras and bands. Every single professional band, and even the amateurs, will tune their instrument in the venue that they may have played the day before with the identical instrument. Yet because they're respectful, because they're professional, because they want to create a great experience for the audience, they tune their instrument every single time before they go into that live performance. My invitation to you is to do the same. Tune into yourself. Close the browser tabs down in your mind so you are available to listen to the other person. Listening does not start by focusing on the speaker. It starts by focusing on you and your body and your presence and where you are in that moment. If you choose not to, no problem. You'll have unproductive meetings. You'll waste your time, you'll lose customers, or still, you'll get customers that you can't solve problems for, and they'll trash talk you in the market. So please be professional, be respectful, tune yourself before you go into a conversation. How do you do this? If you're in control of a meeting request, do not send a meeting request at the top of the hour. Always invite somebody to join a meeting 5 minutes after the hour. This is a really simple hack, and yet it's so profound. Number one, the people you're probably speaking to, prospects, business owners, executives, all of them are in back-to-back meetings. And if they're not in back-to-back meetings, they're coming off phone calls. If you create just 5 minutes between the top of the hour and your meeting, people turn up to a meeting like this. Oh, Oscar, I love your meetings because I've got time to go to the bathroom. I've got time to get a sandwich. I've got time to get a coffee, and I've got time to collect my thoughts. When they arrive at 5 after the hour, they are present and ready to go. When they arrive at the top of the hour, this is what it sounds like. Oh, sorry, I'm late, Jason. I know it's 5 after the hour, but I just had back-to-backs, and you'll forgive me. They will be present in the meeting at 5 minutes after the hour, but mentally they won't be present till 1/4 past. Which meeting do you want to have? You can control that. Start your meetings 5 after the hour.
Oscar, that was great. I'm telling you, I'm going to make a change right now on how I'm scheduling meetings. Because that makes so much sense to not do that. That is such a good thing. Hey, it is. We're approaching the end of our time together today, so I want to give you the opportunity to speak to the audience, to say, hey, this is a way to get in touch. This is something that I can do as a deep listener, someone who can coach you into this, can help you get the skills. I know you got books. I know you got courses, etc. Talk to everybody about how to get in touch with you and how they could engage with you in a way that makes them better listeners.
Certainly, JD. While I'm doing that, I'd like you to think about this question. What's the one thing you will change in your listening as a result of our conversation today? Okay, so I want you to think about that while I explain to everybody. We've got a range of resources for you. If you want to improve your listening, my first recommendation, take the listening quiz at listeningquiz.com. It will take you 5 minutes to complete 20 questions, and you'll receive a report with different in your listening as a result of the last 90 minutes together.
I think I'm going to have to do the tips 2 and 3. Ask that question at the beginning. What will make this a great conversation. And I think I'm going to have to try the water thing. I've never even considered that, but I think tactically, I'm going to start scheduling my meetings 5 after the hour, and I'm going to tell you this. Like, I didn't know this until you told me, but you said any question with more than 8 words is biased. And I've never heard anybody say that. I immediately know that to be true, even though it's the first time I've ever heard it, because I myself, as a questioner, know that when I get wordy in my question, I'm aiming for an answer. So that's something I'm going to pay attention to.
Yeah, and remember, neither is correct or incorrect. It's where it's appropriate. Typically, we want to ask the shorter questions at the beginning. We want to ask the longer questions towards the end, because we've got some decisions to make and invitations about matching, as you mentioned earlier on. JD, it's been a joy to listen to your questions. I hope you're feeling less nervous than when we began today.
No, this is fantastic. You've enlightened me, and I hope that I will continue to build on my listening skills and be a better listener. So it's thelisteningquiz.com. Is that correct? Thelisteningquiz.com?
Just listeningquiz.com.
Okay. Just want to make sure I heard that correctly. And I wanted to ask, so listeningquiz.com, if you want to go check that out. You can find Oscar Trimboli on LinkedIn. He's active there. Got a lot of people following him there. So go Oscar Trimboli on LinkedIn and go to listeningquiz.com. Oscar, it's been a pleasure having you with us today. Thank you for being a guest on the Entrepreneur Master Series. And thank you for all the work that you do everywhere to help us be better listeners.
Thanks for listening to me.
Well, there you have it. That is the end of this episode of the Entrepreneur Master Series. But don't go away. I've got a couple of things that I want to talk about. Specifically, I also want to share with you what's going to be happening next Entrepreneur Master Series, because you're not going to want to miss that one. That's coming up in a couple of weeks. But before I tell you what's coming on that, I've got something to tell you. My very first ever book, Exit Without Exiting, is coming out next Friday, actually on my birthday. All days. I'm so excited about it. It's called Exit Without Exiting. You're going to be able to get it on Amazon. Feel free to go buy a couple hundred copies if you'd like, but just whatever you do, make sure you leave a review. And this book is all about how to exit your business without selling it and begin living the exit lifestyle sooner than you ever thought possible. So that's a timely thing for me. It's coming out next Friday, so I'm really excited about it. But on a more tactical thing, I've got a brand new group coaching course that starts on March the 2nd at 9:30 a.m. Central Time. It's called 40 Days to Find Your True Purpose. And I'm taking a group of people through this. I've already got a bunch of people who've already signed up, and we're going to be going through this together over 40 days, 6 weeks, 1-hour Zoom sessions as a group to address the 4 essential questions that you need to answer in order to know what your true purpose is in life and how to pursue it. So even though you might have experienced a lot of success in your family life, your personal life, your business, or your career, you might feel a sense of lack of fulfillment. And this group coaching program is designed to help you get exactly what you need to get to that place of understanding why you're on this earth. What is it about? Why are you here? Especially for those entrepreneurs who are living a very successful life as an entrepreneur, but still think that there's something missing. That was my story, running a very successful multi-million-dollar business, but I knew that that wasn't what I was on earth for. And now that I've discovered the reason why I'm here, life is much more fulfilling. And I want to help you do that too. And you may be saying to yourself, well, I already know what my purpose is, Jason. I'm good, JD. Don't bother me. Okay. Just remember this. Your purpose is not a destination. It's a journey. And so you might learn just some little tip in this 6-week course over the next 40 days that will get you to that next level in life and success that you wouldn't have been able to do if you stayed content and complacent and where you thought you were supposed to be. Maybe there's another level that God's trying to pull you into that you could find if you just open yourself up to it. So how do you get involved in this? Go to therealjasonduncan.com/purpose, therealjasonduncan.com/purpose, and sign up today. Please tune in again next time when we do this Entrepreneur Master Series. I've got the guest coming in. His name is Austin Zealand, and we're going to be talking about the blueprint to $100,000 a year in passive income. It's not a pipe dream. Making passive income as an investor is not only reality, it's easier than you think it is. Austin Zealand is going to share his journey from Microsoft to becoming a full-time investor. He will be sharing his personal passive income strategies and able to generate 8 figures passively every single year. He'll be sharing his exclusive blueprint to 100K in passive income, which has been featured in Forbes, Yahoo Finance, and many more. And if you want to register, just register at therealjasonduncan.com/EMS. If you registered for this one, which you did because you're here, or unless you're watching on YouTube later, you're automatically registered for the next one. So congratulations. But thank you for tuning in on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, or Zoom, wherever you're watching this. Big thanks to Oscar Trimboli, deep listener, one of the greatest deep listeners you will ever hear and meet. And I'm so glad that he was on the show today. So thanks for tuning in. As always, I am the real Jason Duncan, and Jesus is King. See you next time.